Republicans have taken full advantage of how snobby and out of touch Democrats have become to claim the title of party of the working class, but Trump's big, beautiful budget cuts Medicaid by $723 billion. You can give the people all the goodies Joe Manchin will allow, and it doesn't seem to buy their love. Why? Why is the party that supports so many issues that benefit the middle class still considered out of touch by 62% of Americans? In plain English, nobody likes a snob. Maybe this will put quietus to the nonsense that Elon and Rogan too went to the dark side. I hear that they went to the dark. Yeah, like they got that The Last of Us fungal infection and became zombies. No, they just got driven away. Because that's how politics works these days. One side gets elected precisely because the other side was just in power and pushed their agenda way too far and drove people.
Bill Maher has once again pointed to what he sees as a growing problem for Democrats, and this time his warning is harder to ignore. He's not focused on a single headline or an isolated campaign mistake, but on something much deeper in how the party presents itself. According to him, the issue comes down to tone, public image, and a style of politics that can make ordinary voters feel judged rather than heard. When you look at the examples he highlights, it becomes harder to dismiss this as just poor messaging. His argument is that when a political movement starts sounding dismissive, discourages disagreement, and drifts away from what many people see as common sense, it doesn't bring voters closer. It pushes them further away. This breakdown explores that idea and why it may be contributing to growing frustration among voters in a way that can't easily be overlooked.
What is so galling about this? It's exactly what Barack Obama had just told the Democrats at their convention not to do.
Our politics have become so polarized these days that all of us across the political spectrum seem so quick to assume the worst in others. Unless they agree with us on every single issue, we start thinking that the only way to win is to scold and shame and out-yell.
Now that's the real setup. Bill Maher didn't enter this conversation sounding neutral or relaxed. He sounded frustrated. This wasn't a quick, throwaway comment made for reactions, and then forgotten. It came across more like someone who has watched the same political patterns repeat so many times that he finally felt the need to say it directly. And that's important, because he's not treating this as a minor communications issue. He's describing something he sees as a deeper cultural shift. In his view, it's not just that the left made a few strategic mistakes, it's that it developed a political identity built around certainty, moral lecturing, and public shaming, then acted surprised when large groups of voters started tuning out. That framing is what gives the whole segment its weight. It doesn't come off like provocation for attention, it comes off like a warning. And his underlying message is pretty straightforward. If Democrats don't understand why this perception has taken hold, they're likely to keep repeating the same mistakes.
Bradley, did you go to the bathroom or something when that came on? Because it's almost like he was talking to you directly, like by name. Don't scold, don't shame, don't out-yell. Clinton had the same message. I urge you to meet people where they are. I urge you not to demean them. Treat them with respect. And that's the thing. The actual politicians of the Democratic Party are generally a pretty sane crop of people. The worst of them are leagues better than the worst Republicans. The Democratic politicians are not the ones calling to defend the police and other goofy stuff. But the kind of people who are always howling on social media, yeah, that's who gives a lot of people the ick.
Here's where things start to feel more tense. Politics stops coming across as persuasion and starts feeling, for some people, like punishment. Maher's point here is fairly blunt. Too much lecturing, too much public shaming, and too quick an outrage cycle over every perceived misstep in word choice, tone, or opinion. Once that becomes the dominant atmosphere, the effect is predictable. Instead of feeling engaged, people begin to feel pushed away. And that's the part often overlooked in activist-driven spaces. Constant correction doesn't always signal strength. In many cases, it creates fatigue. When voters start to expect a lecture every time they disagree, they stop entering the conversation at all. From there, support doesn't disappear in a dramatic moment. It erodes slowly. First, patience fades, then trust weakens, and eventually political support follows.
Drives people insane, I get it. And you know what? I used to know Bradley a little bit. He wasn't this guy. And while he may relish writing Cheryl Hines off, I'm not writing him off. Because that's not the way to handle this. President Obama, if you would, one more time, please.
Our fellow citizens deserve the same grace we hope they'll extend to us.
So I get it. Trump makes us crazy. He just does. I found a gray hair myself.
Now the bigger issue starts to come into focus. It's not necessarily that every Democrat holds the same views or speaks the same way. It's that, in many cases, the loudest voices end up shaping how the entire group is perceived. Most voters aren't carefully separating elected officials from activists, online discourse, or culture war commentary. Instead, they tend to absorb the overall tone. They take in the mood more than the details. And when that mood feels rigid, confrontational, or difficult to engage with, it can end up defining the broader image of the party. That's how a wide coalition can start to look narrow from the outside. More moderate or measured voices can get overshadowed by louder and more emotionally charged ones, even if they don't represent the whole picture. Over time, that perception becomes powerful. What sticks is not nuance, but atmosphere, and if the dominant impression becomes one of hostility or closed-off debate, people begin to disengage from the entire space.
Snobby and out of touch Democrats have become to claim the title of party of the working class, but Trump's big, beautiful budget cuts Medicaid by $723 billion. Steve Bannon says a lot of MAGA is on Medicaid. Yeah, it is. 42% of MAGA voters say Medicaid is important to them.
This is where the political cost starts to show itself more clearly. In this framing, Republicans didn't necessarily have to build a new narrative from the ground up. They benefited from an existing perception and reinforced it over time. Maher points directly at that vulnerability, the idea that Democrats come across as snobby, preachy, or disconnected from everyday concerns. Once that image takes hold, it becomes easier to define the party in those terms, whether it reflects the full reality or not. And when that perception sticks, it affects everything that follows. Policies can sound less convincing, messaging can feel more irritating, and even reasonable arguments may get filtered through a familiar reaction of skepticism or frustration. At that point, it's no longer just about individual statements or debates. It becomes about tone and expectation. One side starts to feel exhausting to a portion of voters, while the other side gains an opening to capitalize on that fatigue.
People put quietus to the nonsense that Elon and Rogan too went to the dark side. I hear that all the they went to the dark. Yeah, like they got that The Last of Us fungal infection and became zombies. No, they just got driven away. Because that's how politics works these days. One side gets elected precisely because the other side was just in power and pushed their agenda way too far and drove people in the opposite direction. The pendulum swings back and forth.
In recent years, there's been increasing discussion about the Democratic Party losing a portion of its broader support, with some critics pointing to what they describe as the rising influence of woke policies as a contributing factor. This conversation is no longer coming only from political opponents. It's also been echoed by public figures and commentators who were once seen as more loosely aligned or at least sympathetic to the party, including voices like Elon Musk and Joe Rogan, who have publicly expressed disagreements with its current direction. When high-profile figures with large audiences raise similar concerns, it tends to shape a wider narrative beyond individual opinions. That narrative suggests the party may be gradually shifting away from the concerns of everyday voters, not in one sudden break, but through a series of cultural and political changes that some people feel increasingly disconnected from. Even Bill Maher has been pulled into that broader discussion at times, with speculation about his political alignment, which he has denied. Still, the fact that such questions even circulate highlights how much perception plays a role in modern politics. For critics, the issue isn't just about a few well-known names stepping away. It's about what those reactions represent. a sense that the party's identity is evolving in a way that doesn't resonate as strongly with parts of its previous base. They point to changes in tone, messaging, and priorities as evidence of that shift. Whether that perception fully matches reality is still debated. But what is clear is that the conversation around the Democratic Party has changed, and more people are paying attention to that change than in the past.
With people not voting for anything, but just to get rid of the latest extremists who tried to remake America in their image instead of just governing. Well, right now, it's the Republicans who are the very definition of drunk with power, and also sometimes just drunk.
I don't fully buy the idea that support for Donald Trump was driven only by a desire to push Democrats out of power. There may be some truth in that for a segment of voters, but it doesn't explain the full picture. For many people, the appeal was more straightforward. His messaging often felt clear, direct, and easy to interpret. Supporters could point to specific priorities and felt they had a sense of how his policies might affect their day-to-day lives. Whether someone agrees with those policies or not, that kind of clarity can play a major role in politics, because voters often value understanding a candidate just as much as agreeing with them. On the other side, critics have argued that Kamala Harris sometimes struggled to communicate in a way that fully resonated with certain voters, with some describing her messaging as less direct or harder to follow. Fair or unfair, perceptions like that can create distance, because when voters don't feel a strong connection or clear understanding, uncertainty tends to grow. And in most elections, outcomes aren't shaped by a single factor alone. They come down to a mix of policy, personality, communication, and above all, connection. When one side manages to build a stronger sense of that connection, it often shows in the results.
You got to win the Democratic primary. It's not so easy, but they gamed the system. They changed it.
And who do you see on the horizon for 2028 in the Democratic primary?
Right now?
Yeah.
Bernie and AOC.
No.
They got the biggest crowds.
That doesn't matter.
It won't sustain itself, but right now they have no leader. Okay? But this is the thing the Republican Party has to understand, too. Both parties.
Bill Maher has expressed skepticism about the Democratic Party's outlook heading toward 2028, particularly when it comes to its available bench of potential candidates. In his view, the party may be struggling to produce a figure who can both energize its base and still appeal broadly to moderates and swing voters. A key part of his criticism centers on what he sees as the party's closer association with woke politics. Even figures he has previously spoken more positively about, such as Gavin Newsom, he now suggests have moved further in that direction than he finds politically effective on a national level. He has also been critical of more progressive or left-leaning figures like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Bernie Sanders, and Zoran Mamdani, arguing that their political style and messaging may resonate strongly within certain groups, but face challenges when it comes to broader national appeal. For Maher, the concern is less about ideology in isolation and more about electability, specifically whether any current or emerging candidate can successfully connect across a deeply divided electorate. His overall point is that without a broader and more flexible message, the party could struggle to field a candidate capable of winning decisively in a general election.
Partisan. It's art and Stan. Your microaggression culture doesn't play in the Rust Belt. If a staffer hands you a speech that says menstruating people instead of women, don't say that. Say women. Don't put anyone fresh out of college in charge of the campaign. They've been given participation trophies their whole life. They don't know how to win.
The problem doesn't end with a single election. The same political baggage can carry forward into the next cycle if nothing meaningfully shifts. And that's what makes the situation feel more serious than a normal post-election adjustment. The question then stops being what went wrong last time and becomes who is actually positioned to fix it going forward. Because if the same tone, the same public image, and the same cultural language continue to define the brand, then the next election isn't really a reset. It's just a continuation of the same warning signs. National elections aren't won by energizing only the most committed voices already inside the tent. They're won by appearing broad enough, grounded enough, and relatable enough to bring in the middle. And if that middle still perceives smugness, rigidity, or a lack of openness, then the political risk doesn't disappear after one cycle. It simply carries forward into the next.
People all the goodies Joe Manchin will allow. And it doesn't seem to buy their love. Why? Why is the party that supports so many issues that benefit the middle class still considered out of touch by 62% of Americans? In plain English?
And this is where the conversation shifts from abstract debate to something more concrete. This is where Maher's warning, in his framing, lands with more force. It's about language, standards, identity, and the perception that change has been pushed too quickly or too far for some people to process comfortably. Most voters aren't immersed in political theory or elite discourse. They respond to what feels familiar, what feels reasonable, and what feels grounded in everyday life. From that perspective, when fairness starts to be interpreted as overcorrection, when inclusion feels disconnected from competence, or when common sense seems absent from the conversation, trust can begin to weaken. And as that happens, parts of the political middle may start to drift away. The argument isn't necessarily that the goals themselves are wrong or that the intentions are negative, but that tone, delivery, and direction can shape how those goals are received. If enough voters begin to feel a disconnect between political messaging and everyday reality, they may stop viewing it as progress and start seeing it as excess. And that's the central tension this kind of critique points to, whether what's being communicated aligns with how it is being perceived by the broader electorate.